Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to talk about utility allowances this morning. If you cannot hear me, type into the questions box. But if you can hear me, no need to respond. I do want to start by saying that this is a technical training for owners, developers, property staff, compliance staff, anybody affiliated with one of our low-income developments that would develop or submit or kind of maintain the utility allowances for the properties. So if you are somebody that was unsure of what this training was about and you signed up for it and that's not what you were after, you can go ahead and log off and you can shoot me an email about what you were after and I can respond with some resources for you. I know I saw the registration and it looked like we might have had some folks not looking for utility allowance development training, but looking for maybe some utility assistance and that type of thing. And that is not what this training will be about. This training will be kind of how to get a utility allowance, how to put it into effect, and a chance for you guys to ask lots of questions. I'm Kara Pola. I'm a member of the utility allowance team. I have here with me today Carolyn Metzger and Nicole Martinez, who are also part of the utility allowance team. And we want you guys to take advantage of our being here this morning so that you can ask all your questions and get all the things answered. Do we have anybody that can't hear me, or are we good to go on that? All right, perfect. So in interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started on this. So not a lot has changed with utility allowances since this was built or this training was put together. So if you have questions about anything that's going on, definitely ask those in the questions box. Carolyn's managing that. And then Nicole is going to manage our chat box and put lots of links in there as we go through this training. So we look forward to seeing what you guys have and hope that you find this enjoyable and informative. So, like I said, the purpose of this training is to provide guidance for calculating a utility allowance under the department's multifamily programs. The department will cite noncompliance and or not approve a utility allowance if it is not calculated in accordance with the requirements of the TAC Section 10.614, Treasury Regulation 1.4210, and Chapter 18 of the 8823 Audit Guide. If you are unsure where to find any of those things, you can Google exactly what it is and you can find it, or you can go to our website under utility allowances and those are all linked there. Owners are required to comply with the provisions of the above sections as well as any existing federal or state program guidance. We've also updated the department's frequently asked questions with regards to utility allowances, and you can find that on our website at the link below, or the link at the bottom of this slide. So utility allowance information has its own little section of the compliance part of our website. And you can see the link there at the top and kind of see how we got there in the screenshot. And then all of our email addresses are also listed there. I think most of you probably have those or know where to find them. If you've got utility allowance communication, you should reach out to the monitor that issued the letter versus reaching out to one of the other of us. If that person's out of the office, the other of us can definitely look in and help. And so there are two links to find resources for utility allowances. The first one is obviously our website. And then the next one is going to be the HUD website. And that's where, if you use the HUD Utility Schedule Model, that's where you're going to obtain your Excel version of the HUD model. And you don't want to use the web-based version. You want to download the Excel version, which is the next link below that one. So these forms are updated periodically. Please make sure you're checking the website as well, our website as well as the HUD website, and making sure you're using current versions of the documents. I did receive a few submissions last week. I think I looked at them, or the week prior, and they were versions from like 2017. So definitely keep an eye on that website. They're not updated like monthly, but definitely check into it at least once a year and make sure we haven't made any updates or any changes to the forms you're using. So we do have some definitions and terms I want to go over before we jump in. Building types, and these are defined in two different areas. We've got the document referenced in section 10.614 b1, and that link is there. And then there's an additional resource from HUD that's available that kind of drills down a little bit further and uses just the 5 specific building types, one of which we won't use because we don't develop these for mobile homes. The Power to Choose website is also a good link to have, especially if you are able to pick your utility provider, whether you do the HUD model or written local estimate or energy consumption. Those are all 3 where you would need to know that, as well as actual use. Component charges, these are the actual use or actual costs associated with the billing of a residential utility. And this can be rates, fees, taxes, or anything else that's associated with the, a bill for the utility that's in question. Multifamily direct loan, or MFDL, these are going to be funds provided through the Home Program, Neighborhood Stabilization, or NSP, National Housing Trust Fund, repayments from the Tax Credit Assistance Program, or TCAP-RF, or any other program available through the department, local political subdivision, or administrating agency for any multifamily development that may require a utility allowance. If I accidentally say home, what I'm referencing is MFDL. I'm meaning all of these. It used to just be home, but we've added several programs just through funding availability that are now all under the MFDL umbrella. So a renewable source is energy produced from an energy property described in section 48 of IRC and section 45, and those links there. So if you want any more information on that, you can definitely do some research on the side and email me with any questions. I will do my best to answer them. That's not something we see very often or really at all. Submetered utility, this is a utility purchased from a local utility provider, and then the building owner submeters that out. So a lot of times we see this with water and sewer, where your tenants have submeters, but the bill from the main meter at the property gets then divided up based off of tenant usage. This must be based on the resident's actual consumption of the utility and not on an allocation method or a ratio utility billing system, or RUBS. And the rate at which the utility is billed cannot exceed the rate incurred by the building owner for that utility. So you can't charge more than what you're being charged in that scenario. Utility allowance is an estimate of the expected monthly cost of any utility for which a resident is financially responsible. This does not include phone, cable, or internet. And most of the time, this is referred to as UA. If I don't say utility allowance and I say UA, this is what I'm talking about. Utility provider is the company that provides residential utility service, also known as the provider. So there are a few required forms, and again, those are available on our website. You're always going to submit a utility allowance questionnaire. You're always going to have a resident posting, either an annual review if your methodology is not changing, or a change posting, which would tell your tenants that you're changing the method by which you develop their utility allowance. You're also going to need to send in the previous year's approved utility allowance, and then any backup to the current methodology request. And we're going to go through that so you'll know exactly what to submit when you submit these, especially if you're changing methodologies. So how to submit, and we'll talk about this several times because it's still something that gets missed periodically. All submissions must be uploaded into the Development's Compliance Monitoring Tracking System, or CMTS account. When uploading these, you need to select utility allowance documents in the type menu. In the description box, you will identify the method, and if it is an initial request or an annual review, so you'll say HUD model, annual review, and then you will, in the TDHCA context, select utility allowance. Please do not select a specific monitor. If you send that directly to Carolyn Metzger, it is probably not going to get reviewed as your annual utility allowance. And then if you have a monitoring review, you may have some issues of non-compliance because you failed to submit this correctly. If the submission is not uploaded as outlined above, it will not be reviewed by the UA team, and the development may be cited with non-compliance. These instructions are at the top of the questionnaire and on our website. So there are several different places as a reminder. So it should be something that you've got ample opportunity to catch before it gets submitted to the wrong person. But if you do have a question on that, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that you guys all know exactly how to submit utility allowances. So there are 7 methodologies, 2 of which are not department issued or really reviewed. We don't approve the Rural Housing Services or RD UA, and we don't approve a UA that you get issued by HUD. So if HUD sends you a rent schedule annually, because you've submitted your UA study to them, that's between you and HUD. You're going to submit that when there's time for a review, for a monitoring review, but you're not going to submit that annually like you would some of these other methodologies. The 5 that the department is involved in are the Public Housing Authority Utility Allowance Methodology, Written Local Estimate, Energy Consumption Model, Actual Use Method, and the HUD Utility Schedule Model. We put that HUD model at the end because that's going to be the one we talk about the most. So for the PHA method, do we have any questions before I just scroll through? Okay. For the PHA method, this is the Public Housing Authority method, and this is where you would use the utility allowance as established by the applicable PHA for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which used to be called Section 8. If a PHA provides vouchers to your tenants but is not the most applicable PHA, you would not be able to use the UA schedule from that PHA. So if you're in Austin and Travis County sends tenants to your property with a voucher, that doesn't mean you can use the Travis County UA. That means you probably still need to use Austin, but you do have voucher holders from Travis County. If the PHA publishes different schedules based on building type, the owner is responsible for implementing the correct schedule based on the development's building types. If the PHA publishes a UA schedule specifically for energy efficient units and the owner desires to use that schedule, the owner must show that the buildings meet the PHA specifications for energy efficiency once every 5 years, and we're going to rely on you guys for that, and then you would submit the communication from the PHA to show that you've met that requirement to use that energy efficient UA. If the PHA schedule lists flat fees for any utilities, those flat fees must be included in the calculation of the utility allowance if the resident is responsible for that utility. And I've seen recently, I think it's on the Lubbock PHA schedule, it's got a CC for customer charge at the bottom, and then it has like 8 and then a slash and then 22. It is the owner's responsibility to contact that PHA to determine which customer charge goes with electric, which goes with gas, or whatever they go to. So if you are on the conservative side and you use the 22, but we find out that the 22 is for gas and not electric, then we're going to cite noncompliance on that because you don't have a properly calculated utility allowance. So go through those PHA schedules and review them and make sure that there's no questions as to what the charges should be. This methodology must be used for the voucher holders from the PHA unless the building has MFDL funds, in which case you will use whatever the department has approved for the MFDL program for that building. So if the development is located in an area that does not have a municipal, county, or regional housing authority that publishes a utility allowance schedule for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the owners must select an alternative methodology unless the buildings are located in a Housing Choice Voucher Service area of a Council of Government, or a COG, the department's Housing Choice Voucher Program, or another PHA which publishes a separate utility allowance schedule specific to the department's location. And I've got an example of that, so hold on. Annual review by the department is not required for a PHA schedule unless there is a change to the utilities the resident is financially responsible for, or if you've previously used something else and you are now switching to the PHA method, you would then have to request approval for that. So here is an example of the City of Austin's Housing Authority showing all the different building types that they have. So you would need to make sure that you're using the most applicable building type. And if you're not sure what your building type is, you can let us know, we can help, or you can reach out to the Housing Authority and say, hey, if I had a voucher holder in this building, what UA schedule would they use? Here is the screenshot of the website that we use. You can see the link down there at the bottom. This is where we go to find out and to kind of verify that the property or that the housing authority has the Section 8 program. So like you can see, the housing authority of Alba only has a low rent program. That would mean you could not use that housing authority's utility allowance schedule because they don't have a housing choice voucher program. This is what we're going to utilize to determine the applicable PHA for the area, as long as the PHA has the Section 8 program or housing choice voucher program. So what if the development is in an area that does not have a PHA, but another PHA serves that area? And we see this a lot in the Dallas area. In this case, the PHA that serves the area must issue a utility allowance for the specific area in which a development is located in order to use that methodology. So the Arlington Housing Authority issues a utility allowance for Irving. It is specific to Irving. They've done a UA study. They've built a schedule based off of rates that are available in Irving. So this one would be acceptable even though there is no housing, public housing authority for the city of Irving. Do we have any questions on PHA before? Okay. Excuse me. Excuse me, my allergies are killing me. So for written local estimate, that's the next utility allowance that we're going to talk about. This estimate must come from the local utility provider. It must be signed by the provider's representative. It must include all component charges for providing the utility services. It must include all items which contribute to the utility. So, for example, if the estimate does not include air conditioning, it is not acceptable as an estimate because your tenants are paying for air conditioning as part of their electric. We did have a provider that started taking those off. So you would need to be sure that when you are looking at that written local estimate letter before you post your tenants and submit to the department, that you are seeing all the things that your tenants are responsible for. Additionally, if your local provider won't give you a written local estimate, we cannot make them. It's my understanding that the provider in San Antonio won't give these anymore. That we can't call them and tell them they have to start offering these to you guys. So that would be something between you and the provider. The beginning day of the 90-day notification period should be the date of the letter from the utility provider. However, a full 90 days is required. So if you get your letter in April, but you don't submit to the department until July and you send it in and it's got an April posting date, we're going to tell you that has to be changed to the date you submitted to us in July, because we have to have a full 90 days of notification and posting. So you need to try to get those to us very quickly within, I think a week is probably a reasonable turnaround time for you guys to get it, post, and then submit to the department if you're not able to get it done on the exact day. The department will acknowledge the receipt of the annual submission. However, we don't review this until you have a monitoring review. So we might look at the letter, and unless something's glaring, we're not going to dig too deep into these, because the monitor that conducts your monitoring review is going to be the one that checks on this for you. This is an example of what written local estimate looks like. So you can see the letter where we've acknowledged it, and then the letter on the right from Reliant, which is a provider in some of the deregulated areas, that kind of shows an example of what those letters would need to include. Do we have any questions on written local estimate or anything? No questions right now. All right, perfect. Everybody's waiting for the HUD model. So the next methodology is the energy consumption model. This is also called the ECM. This model must be calculated by a properly licensed mechanical engineer, and you need to upload their license when you submit these. The estimate must, at a minimum, take into consideration specific factors that include but are not limited to the unit size, the building types, the orientation, design, materials, mechanical systems, appliances, characteristics of the building location, and available historical data. And that's where that engineer comes in handy, because they know all of that and they are able to put you together a schedule that includes all those required items. Component charges must be no older than those in effect 60 days prior to the beginning of the 90-day period. So again, if you get your packet from the engineer back in April, but you don't submit and post until July, we're going to send that back because those component charges are now older than 60 days. And we have had kind of a rush of that. I would say we didn't see it at all, and then all of a sudden we've had several get denied for this. This is a thing. So be sure that when you get those from the provider, and if you have an owner that is not prompt in turning those over to a compliance group or your management group, you would want to reach out to that owner and explain to them the importance of getting those turned over pretty quickly. The beginning of the 90-day notification period should be 60 days after the end of the last month of the 12-month period for which data was used to compute the estimate. Again, that's going to be your engineer has put together this whole packet. They've sent it to you. You've posted the day they've received it, and that's all going to be within that 60-day window. Annual review is required for this methodology, and we will approve or deny or partially approve or deny depending on what your funding sources from other PJs are, participating jurisdictions. So here's what an energy consumption model approval is going to look like. You can see the letter there on the left, and then kind of what we get from an engineer or what you guys get from an engineer on the right that shows kind of what all went into it, what the amounts are, does it include all the component charges? And this particular letter says component charges were less than 30 days old as of the date of this letter. So if you hold on to that letter, this one stated September 25th, if you hold on to that till December, those component charges are now too old to use. So you would have to get a new model put together. Are there any questions on energy consumption? Okay, no questions so far. So next we're going to talk about the actual use methodology. This is an allowance based on an average of the actual use of similarly constructed and sized units in the building using actual utility data and component charges. So this one, you're going to put together a spreadsheet, which I'll show you what that looks like, of all the data from the utility bills for a 12-month period. Then you're going to submit it to the department, and we're going to calculate your utility allowance. So upon receipt of the required information, we'll determine if the owner has provided the minimum information necessary to calculate using this methodology, and then we'll communicate with you guys if something's missing or if it's too old or if it's not acceptable. The department will complete its evaluation and calculation within 45 days of receipt of all information requested. The update and all backup documentation for this one must be submitted to the department no later than August 1st. So that's already passed. So if this is a methodology you use or want to use and you've not submitted yet, get that in soon so we can get it reviewed and get you a response back. You are encouraged to submit prior to that deadline, just because these do take a little more involvement on our end. So we ask that you get them in as soon as you possibly can, as soon as they're complete. Once the department issues the response, you must then post to the residents on the date the department issues the response. So if you send this in and we look at it today and we send you a response today, your expectation is to post today. Now, if we don't send you the response till after 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, you could post tomorrow, but it would need to be done pretty quickly. So what must be provided for this methodology? You need a minimum sample size of usage data for at least 5 continuously occupied units of each type, or 20% of each unit type. So if you have 100 units of the unit type, you're going to send us 20%, but if you only have 8 of a unit type, you're going to send us 5. If there are less than 5 units of any type, data for 100% of the unit type must be provided. So if you only have 4, we need all of them. You will upload the following into CMTS using data that's no older than 60 days prior to when you intend to implement this. So if you're sending it in on July 22nd, your stuff needs to be pretty current to that date, because we're probably not going to do it till mid-August. And then you're going to have to post, and that's when that 90-day period starts. You need to submit an Excel spreadsheet listing each unit used for the sample size, the unit number, what size it is, how much square footage it has, the household's move-in date, and the utility usage for the 12-month period. If there's a 0 in that usage, we're going to take that unit out. If that unit hasn't been occupied for 12 full months, it no longer qualifies as part of your sample. All documentation obtained from the utility provider and or copies of the actual utility bills. We need the utilities rates that are used at the time of the submission. So if you just send us in all the data, then we're not going to be able to calculate this because we don't know what provider you're using. The rent roll showing occupancy at the end of each month for which the data was requested from the provider. Documentation of the current UA used by the development, which is not, that's the same with all of them. So here's an example of what we see when we get these. We get a rent roll, we get a questionnaire. You can see at the bottom the little excerpt from the provider's rates. And then you can see this spreadsheet that shows the unit number. We don't need the meter number, but that's fine. I can see here that everybody lived there longer than a year at the time of the review. I can see when the data's from. And then over on the end, you can see where we've done an average and then kind of worked out the math on the utilities there. Then you'll get a letter from us after we review it, and that'll tell you what needs to be done as far as the posting and what amounts can be used. If the submission contains all the required documentation and information, we will calculate the UA for each bedroom size using the guidelines below. So if the data obtained is more than the sample requirement, all data submitted will be used. So if you only need to send us 5 units, but you include 12, we're going to use all 12. If more than 12 months of data is provided, we're going to use the most current 12 months. We're not going to use the full 18 months or whatever you might have submitted. The allowance will be calculated by multiplying the average units of measure, so kilowatt hours or gallons if it's water, or whatever the one is for gas. I can't remember off the top of my head. And then we will multiply that for each unit type for the bedroom size. The allowance will be rounded up to the next whole dollar amount, again, just like it would be in any other utility allowance method. If allowances are calculated for different utilities, each amount will be rounded up to the next whole dollar amount and then added together for a total allowance. If the data submitted indicates 0 usage for any month, that data will not be used. So if you send that in, send me in a spreadsheet with 8 units and one of those units has a month where 0 was the amount for the usage, I'm going to delete that unit from the sample. I might still be able to get an effective utility allowance. I might not. I might have to email you and get another unit submitted in there, but that'd be something we'd handle on a case-by-case basis. Here's what your letter is going to look like. It's going to kind of tell you how we did it and why the request is approved, and what day you need to post and what day the rates go into effect or the utility allowance goes into effect, and then who to contact if you have any questions. Do we have any actual use questions? Okay. So the next one, and this is the biggie, I would think, is the HUD Utility Schedule Model, or the HUD model. This and all related resources can be found on our website under the Utility Allowance section. Each item on the schedule must be displayed out to 2 decimal points. The total allowance must then be rounded up to the next whole dollar amount. The component charges used can be no older than those in effect 60 days prior to the beginning of the 90-day period for posting. The beginning of the 90-day notification period is the date entered as the form date on the HUD model. The allowance must be calculated using the Excel version that is available on the HUD website, and you cannot change or adjust any of the data that auto-populates for that on that spreadsheet. If we feel like that's happened, and I don't think we've ever felt like that's happened, we would deny it, and then we would build our own with what you've submitted. So in the event the zip code or PHA code for the local PHA to the development is not listed in the location of the workbook, we will look up the PHA code that is closest in distance, and we will use that for the usage data on that first tab. If the owner elects any of the green discount options for a development, documentation to evidence that the units and buildings meet that green discount standard as prescribed in the model are submitted, and you need to submit those annually. Those aren't just one time, and some of those green discounts have to be renewed annually. So you want to get with your engineer that tells you that this is what your property is allowed to use, and make sure that they're helping you with those annual renewals if they're required. We do not take into consideration any costs or credits that a consumer would incur because of their actual usage. So if they get a $10 credit because they stayed under 2,000 kilowatt hours on utilities, we're not going to take that into account. That would be just kind of a bonus on their end if they actually got that. During the annual review, the department will complete a HUD model and issue an approval, a partial approval, or a denial, depending on the scenario. And the HUD model will be attached to the approval letter. And if our HUD model differs from the HUD model you put together, feel free to reach out to the issuing monitor and ask for a copy or ask any questions. Sometimes it's off a little bit because of tax rates, but most of the time they're pretty close to the same amount that you guys submit. So we're going to talk about the HUD model with each tab. So the location tab of the HUD model is the first tab, and that's where you're going to put in the zip code. If the zip code's not available, we're going to use the PHA code for the appropriate public housing authority. Then you're going to enter the property name under the name of housing authority or city. The state should remain Texas, and the date should be the date that you're putting this packet together. The climate data is then going to auto-populate based on the zip code or PHA code that's entered in the first box. The data should not be changed or altered for any reason on this section of the HUD model. So I forgot I had circles. My bad. I apologize. So to obtain the rates for the areas which are deregulated, you're going to want to visit the Power to Choose website. If no plans are available, then the rates must be obtained from the provider in the area. You want to click View Results after you put your zip code in. And then it's going to populate this other item over here. This is what the next page of the website would look like. And you want to click the fact sheet for the plan that you want to use. The fact sheet needs to be submitted with the HUD model for review. It needs to show the date that the rates are effective. If it doesn't have a date, we're not going to be able to use it. And that's how we're going to calculate your HUD model. So here's an example of what a fact sheet would look like. So this data will be used for the tariffs tab of the HUD model. If the TDSP pass-through charges are not on the EFL or the electricity facts label, you need to get those from the TDSP website, and those are usually, the website's usually on the EFL that you're picking if it's not already listed there. If there's not an effective date on the rate sheet, you cannot be used for the HUD model. So here's kind of a zoomed in version of these rates, and you can see that we've got an energy charge, a pass-through TDSP distribution charge, a pass-through TDSP customer charge, and then that one-time TerraPass setup, that's something that would not be included in what we calculate. Here is an example from where you can get the TDSP charges if you are not included, if they are not included on the EFL that you use. The link right there will take you to a report that's 8 pages long. You need to go to the very last page and get the totals for your area. This is only necessary if the rate sheet you choose does not have that information already listed. You do not have to add this to your submission if your rate sheet already includes it, like the example that we just saw, but these do have to be included. So if they're not there, you do have to go find them and put them in your HUD model to make sure you're calculating correctly. And you can see that there are 5 different divisions of electric providers, so you want to be sure you're using the correct one, but that will be listed on your rate sheet for the providers or for the area. Here's what that last page is going to look like. So you can see that for Encore, CenterPoint, AEP Central, AEP North, or Texas New Mexico Power, those are all the rates, and you're going to use the total delivery rate and then the consumer charge. You're not going to use that total kilowatt hours. That's kind of already done the math just to show you what that would come out to for 1,000 kilowatt hours. So here's the tariffs tab of the HUD model. We're going to go step by step. So you want to enter the date at the top under current, and then you're going to put the provider, the rate name, and the effective date of the rates. Then you're going to put if there's a summer, and this will be outlined on your rate plan. We don't see this on deregulated usually, but on your regulated rate plan, sometimes there is a different rate for the months during the summer. The monthly charge is going to be any TDSP provider and provider monthly fees, so any pass-through charges or any provider-specific charges. The first block is going to correspond with that rate sheet. Sometimes there will be, you know, for the first 600, it's this amount, and then for all remaining, it's this amount. For the example we have, it's going to be all at one rate. So the cost of the rate block will correspond in the next boxes. And I do have an example with a different setup, so don't panic if yours is in a regulated area. For this example, there is no summer or winter rate. They're all the same, so you put everything in summer and nothing goes in winter. Extra charges, these could be your pass-through rates from the TDSP provider or any sort of provider extra charges. And then taxes are going to be based on the state electric tax, the population tax, and the city tax if the city charges a tax. So here you can see next to each other the rate plan used and the HUD model. You can see where we've put the rate provider, the plan name, and the date at the top. There's no summer rates or summer dates, so everything is January to December. We've got our monthly charge of $4.39. All of the utilities used are going to be at 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So you do have to convert that into dollars. So that would make it 0.02. And then we've got the pass-through charge entered in extra charges. And then we've got our taxes entered at the bottom. So for this example, we're going to also do gas, and it's going to have the same schedule, same type of thing that we have for electric. It's going to have a rate sheet, so you'll have to go to the provider and obtain the rates for from the natural gas provider's website. Sometimes these are a little harder to find, so you may have to call the city to reach out or the provider to reach out and get these. You want to include all charges that will be present on the tenant's utility bill. You can see here we've got a base charge, a commodity charge, and then there's a tax adjustment, a gas cost adjustment, and a rate case expense recovery that needs to be included. And so we're going to get those from the provider's website. We're going to include those as extra charges. So here's we're going to put the HUD model together with the gas rates that we just looked at. Again, we're going to use the utility name, the rate name, and the effective date. Measurement of units on this one, you're going to need to edit because gas can be measured in, I think, 3 different ways. You're going to also have your summer rates, if any. This particular example has January to December for summer, so there are no winter rates that differ. The monthly charge is going to be whatever that monthly charge from the rate plan is. And then you're going to do your size of the rate block. Some of the gas rates have it broken up. Some of them don't. This particular example does not. And then you're going to have the amount per CCF here. Since there are no differing winter and summer rates, you're going to leave the winter section blank. Extra charges, you're going to do whatever was on that rate sheet as an extra utility charge. And then taxes are going to be included just like they were on the electric section. So here's these two things side by side. You can see our rates here, and then our total here to use for extra charges. And then we've put all that in the HUD model with the $17.39 as the monthly charge. All of the CCF are billed at the same rate, and then the extra charges apply to all billed, and then the taxes for the city. So water and sewer supply tariffs, you're going to use whatever's available on the provider website again. And this particular provider has a multifamily rate plan. And this data is going to be used in that tariffs tab. So we've gotten the rates from the provider's website. We're going to include all charges that would be present on the tenant's utility bill. And unless you send us a a utility bill that shows that there's a larger meter at the property, and that needs to be, that rate is divided out, we're going to use that smallest meter size that's listed on the rate sheet as a basic water charge or basic sewer charge. So this is going to go in the same way. We're going to put the city of Houston as our provider and the date that I got the rates for this example. We're going to change our measurements because some of these are in a different measurement. Most waters and sewers billed by gallons, but some are not, so double check that. The monthly charge is going to be based on that meter charge. The size of blocks, sometimes water will have for the first 2,000 it's this, for the next 5,000 it's this, and for the remainder it's this. So this is one where you would definitely want to break those up. And then on the rate charge, it's per 1,000 gallons. So we have to break that down to a per gallon charge. because that's how the HUD model thinks. So you would have to take that rate, as you can see in that last bullet point, the 458 divided by 1,000 gets us 0.00458 per gallon in this case. Extra charges would be anything additional. I know like City of Austin, I think has some extra charges that are added on, so that's where that would go. But I did not see any on the City of Houston for this example, so I don't have anything there. And then we're going to do the same thing for sewer. Again, we're going to use the smallest meter size unless we have information that shows we should use something else. And we're going to put, again, the provider name and the date, the method of measurement, the rate for the monthly charge, any blocks that are broken up, and then the cost of the blocks as is applicable. And if there's any extra charges, we're going to put those in, and we're going to do the same conversion we did with the water. With sewer, we're going to take the 666 per 1,000 gallons and convert that into a per gallon to get 0.0666. If the rate indicates that there's a cap for sewer charges, we will utilize the cap on the form for purposes of calculating sewer, but we might not do that until we get to the end because it might not show us where that cap kind of hits. It might not hit for 1 and 2 bedrooms, but it might hit for 3 and 4 bedrooms. So that's going to be on a case-by-case basis. And if you have that at your property and you're curious as to how we develop that, definitely reach out by email and we will walk you through that better. So here is the building characteristics tab of the HUD model. And this is important, and a lot of the errors that we see when your numbers differ from our numbers is because something was not done correctly on this tab. So you're going to select your building type. You're going to leave these two alone because they should always be the projected allowance schedule and the standard electric utility tariff. If you have a green discount, you're going to select that in this box here. You're going to leave unit size alone because it's going to populate correctly using what's defaulted there. And then you're going to tell us how is your space heating done, how is cooking done, how other electric and air conditioning should generally always be electric. I haven't ever seen those change. Water heating might be electric or natural gas. And then for this one, the tenant pays water and sewer, so I've updated that. Again, if you have heat pump and space heating, but it's electric resistance, it's not going to populate correctly on the last tab if you don't change that to heat pump. So here is the end result from all the data we just entered. So you can see that we've put in all the electric rates, we've told it where to populate, so it's done that and given us a total in that yellow line. You can clear the data that's unnecessary or does not apply to your property. And for this one, the space heating is resistant, so I've taken out the heat pump and natural gas and the zeros that would have been for bottled gas and fuel oil. Make sure you do not delete an applicable line. I actually see a lot of folks that delete air conditioning on accident. That's going to skew your numbers at the end, so you want to be sure that you don't remove any data that's applicable to your property. And then that bottom number in the yellow line is the applicable UA per size based off of this example that we did. Are there any HUD model questions right now? Okay. So either no one can hear me or nobody's watching. Got it. Just kidding, guys. If you have questions, feel free to type them in. I know for a lot of you, this is probably a refresher, and I appreciate you being here for that with UAs about to all be due by October 1st. We'll talk about that later. So we have another example of a HUD model. We're going to kind of walk back through it, but this is an example based on a regulated area, and the area is San Antonio. These rates have changed since this training was developed, so please don't use these rates anymore. You'll need to go to the CPS website and obtain the current rates. So again, we're going to put our location. We're going to put our property name in there instead of leaving it as San Antonio, but we're going to leave Texas alone. And then we're going to put the date that we developed the plan or that we obtained the rates, and we're putting this together on. The climate data, again, is going to auto-populate, so you won't do anything with that. So to obtain the rates in an area, you're going to go to the website, and then you're going to search unless you know exactly where to find it, and you're going to obtain the rates that are applicable to all residents. So you can see here for CPS, there's a residential electric rate and a residential all electric rate. But that all electric rate says it is only available to homes with active CPS accounts prior to June 2006. So if you are a current property, that's not going to be the most applicable rate plan. You're going to want to use the residential electric rate, because that's one that any new tenant, anybody moving into your property is going to be able to obtain their rates with. So here's an example of what that rate plan is going to look like. We've got kind of the whole page, but then I've zoomed out the information that's applicable. So if the provider has multiple residential plans, you need to use the rate plan that all tenants could use. If there are additional items like riders or adjustments, you would need to obtain those rate sheets as well. So the fuel cost factor is something that's going to be included in this. And so the CPS website makes it super easy, and we can obtain that from them. And that's what this would look like. And then we would use the total. So let's put it together. We've got our date, we've got our provider, our rate plan, and our effective date. This plan does have a summer rate, so we need to change the dates to match what's on that rate plan to be June through September. And then we've got our monthly charge of $875 based off that rate plan. And for the summer, the first block is $600, and then the remainder are going to be billed at a higher rate. So we've put that in here. And the first block is what the first 600 are billed at, and then the next block is what everything else is billed at. For winter, everything is one rate, so we've put remainder in the size, and then we've put the rate in the cost of the first block. And then we've put our fuel cost recovery factor in this extra charges box. And then our taxes, the city of San Antonio does not charge at this time, so that is going to be just the state electric tax and the population tax. So you can see these side by side here. We can see here that peak capacity charges are only billed during the summer months of June to September. So that's why we've broken those out and have two blocks in the summer section. So for this example, I went ahead and put trash in there. You can see that the rates are available on the city website, and we're going to use the total city services for the smallest trash thing, unless you tell us that everybody has to use a medium or a large. And if your trash service differs, if it's based off of something else, you would need to send us the rate plans so that we would be sure that we're getting the right amounts included in there. So trash collection fees, we're going to use the applicable rate, just like we have everything else. And if they're taxable, you can figure out what the taxes are. For this example, I did not do that. I just used the $18 because I don't know what the taxes are because I don't have an actual bill. And then that's going to populate for each unit size on the last page of the HUD model. So here's our next page. We've got everything the same at the top. We've got our building size, our two items that need to be left alone. We don't have a green discount. And then we've got our information about the utilities. So we can see everything is electric, water and sewer are not applicable, and the tenant pays for trash. So this one is another example of how everything is very property specific. I don't see a lot of folks with trash unless they are single family homes or duplexes, but I wanted to show how that works for sure. So here's this one on the end result, and you can see that I've cleared out the data that did not apply to our example property, and then trash populated at $18 per unit size without a change. And so the totals are down there in the bottom in the yellow. Same thing goes for these. Don't delete something that's needed. You got to be careful that you're getting the right utility amount for the cooking and water heating and space heating that could have different options. Are there any questions on HUD models before we talk about the links? Okay, so here are the links of where to find the tax rates. So most of these are on the comptroller, or actually all of them are on the comptroller's website. And there is a base rate for all of Texas. And then there's a table that shows the tax rates based on the population of any city or town. And then there's a table that shows what cities charge and what cities don't charge for gas and electricity. And then there's a table that shows the tax rate for all the cities and counties in Texas. And so those are all helpful links that would be applicable to using this HUD model methodology for utilities. So here's what those things look like. So the first one you can see is in the pink highlighted, where that's going to be added to all utility charges for gas and electric. The next one you can see that for less than 1,000, or for more than 1,000, but not less than, or but less than 2,500, they're going to have a 0.581%. And then for populations of 2,500 to 10,000, they're going to have a 1.07%. And then for 10,000 or more, they're going to have a 1.997%. And then the sheet on the far right kind of shows you what it looks like, what the Texas sales and use tax rates look like. Those are updated and those do change, so you would want to obtain those pretty regularly. We just recently updated the ones that we use internally. So I did see that there were some changes and some errors that was brought to my attention by one of our housing partners. So we appreciate when you guys do that, because sometimes we miss it too. So now we're going to talk about building types, unless there are any questions thus far. Okay, no questions. So there's two documents that are used for building types, like we talked about earlier in the training, and those are here. We can see we've got a big document from the Housing and Urban Development Office for Public and Indian Housing. And then we've got kind of the drilled down what goes with what to get it into just 5 brackets for utility allowance purposes. Here is kind of a zoomed in of that condensed document. Currently, we use the HUD guidance as shown on this slide to determine the appropriate building type for developments when we're calculating a HUD model. So on duplex, triplex, fourplex, townhouse, you can see those all have a number 3 at the end, and those are all going to be single family attached. Any type of multifamily that's 2 to 4 units, it's going to be number 4, which is going to be low-rise apartments 2 to 4 units. So if you have a unit on top of another unit, or 2 units and 2 units on top of those 2 units, that's going to be your applicable building type. If you have stacked units and the building is 5 or more units, you're going to use that apartments 5 plus. And then, like I said earlier, we don't use the manufactured homes. I think we only have one property that goes on that, and they use a public housing utility allowance, I believe. So this kind of shows you if you have a question about why we used what we used. And if we go out to monitor your property and you've been submitting apartments 5 plus as your building type, and we see that you guys have a long row of townhouses, we're going to probably make a note, and we're going to change that on the next utility allowance review. It's the owner's responsibility to make sure that the correct building type is submitted. So that might result in non-compliance if you've not submitted the correct building type. So if there's a question, definitely send us a picture of your property. We're happy to help you work through that, because we'd rather have you do it correctly than we would have to cite non-compliance. We really do not want to cite non-compliance. So like I said, if the multi-story building where there's units stacked on top of other units has less than 5 units, the department is going to calculate that based on low-rise 2 to 4 units. If the multi-story building has 5 or more units, we're going to calculate that based on apartments 5 plus. So if you have questions on how that affects your property, if it does affect your property, and you may have, I know the property I was at right before I came to work for the department, I had one building that this would have been applicable to. Everything was 5 plus except for this one building that had 2 units on top of 2 other units. So it can change internally what you have to use at your property. So now we're going to talk about MFDL buildings, unless there's any questions we need to address. Okay, so developments with multifamily direct loan funds issued by the department may use any methodology except the PHA method. They may not combine methodologies. They must use the department issued or approved UA for all units, even voucher holders. And housing tax credit buildings in which there are units under the MFDL programs are considered HUD regulated buildings, and the MFDL utility allowance will be the allowance for all units in the building, regardless of whether or not the resident is on the MFDL program. The developments with multifamily direct loan funds that are not issued by the department are going to have the same, except we don't determine the methodologies that are allowed for those, but you must use the issued or approved UA for all units, even voucher holders. And the same thing applies to your building type. If you have a housing tax credit building with even one home unit, you are going to have to use whatever UA is prescribed under that home program for the whole building, even though all those other folks are not on the home program. So the department will issue a utility allowance if the annual review is not received by October 1st. For property-specific data, we're going to use the annual owner's compliance report, the entrance interview questionnaire from the most recent monitoring review. The owner may also be contacted for any missing or unclear information. Utilities will be evaluated in the following manner. For regulated utilities, we will contact the provider directly and apply the charges that are in effect no later than 60 days before we're going to issue that allowance. For deregulated utilities, the department will use the Power to Choose website and will search available providers by zip code. The plan chosen will be the median cost per kilowatt hour based on the average price per kilowatt hour for the 1,000 kilowatt hour block. The department will notify the owner contact and CMTS of the new allowance, and the owner will be provided a 5-day period to report errors related to the physical characteristics of the buildings and the utilities paid by those residents. The allowance must be implemented for rent due in all program units 30 days after the department notifies the owner of the allowance. Are there any questions on MFDL? Okay. You guys are being quiet. So for our utility allowances after the compliance period, so after that federal compliance period, the utilities paid to the owner are accounted for in the utility allowance, regardless of how they are determined. TCAP, exchange, bond, and state housing trust fund developments layered with housing tax credits no longer within the compliance period also include utilities paid to the owner as part of the utility allowance. So if you've been doing your water and sewer based off RUBS and you do not have MFDL funding, you're going to now include those in the utility allowance. If you have MFDL funding, you should not have had RUBS and everything should have already been included. The tenant paid portion of the rent plus the applicable utility allowance must not exceed the rent limit. It is the owner's responsibility to ensure that all rents are properly restricted. So what does this mean? This means that if the development bills water and sewer based on a RUBS system during the compliance period, it's a non-optional fee that then must be taken into account with the monthly rent. However, after that compliance period is over, this now becomes part of the utility allowance and is no longer considered a non-optional fee, and failure to do this will result in non-compliance. That being said, we do have a training coming up in September that is specific for properties after the compliance period, and we will go into this a little more in depth. But failure to do this properly will result in non-compliance, and we do see this a lot when it shifts, and we review right after they've gone post 15. And if your LURA requires a longer compliance period, this does not change this. This is just the 15-year federal compliance period that this is required for. So any changes to the utility allowance, an owner may not change methodologies or the utilities that a resident is financially responsible for without prior written department approval. The department will review all requests with the exception of the actual use methodology, which is 45 days instead of 90, within 90 days of the receipt of the request. If the owner fails to post the notice to the residents and simultaneously submit the request to the department by the beginning of the 90-day period, the approval or denial will be delayed for up to 90 days after the department notification. So once approval to start or stop charging for a utility is received, owners must implement the change in utilities charged at the time of each household's lease renewal and no sooner. So if you have a tenant that is in a lease right now and they are not responsible for water and sewer, and we approve you to add that on as a utility, but their lease isn't up till March 31st, you cannot start billing them for water and sewer until April 1st. There are some requirements for annual review. For rural housing and HUD issued utility allowances, the owners must demonstrate that the utility allowance has been reviewed annually and in accordance with rural housing and HUD regulations. You'd show us that during a monitoring review because you'd submit, sorry, I'm not used to talking this much anymore. The owner is going to submit those annually. They're going to submit the 3 years worth with a monitoring review. So we're going to see that then. For the PHA method, the owners are responsible for periodically determining if the applicable PHA released an updated schedule to ensure timely completion. When a new allowance is made available by the PHA, it can be implemented immediately, but must be implemented for rent due 90 days after the update was released. For written local estimate, HUD model, and energy consumption model, the owners must update the allowance once a calendar year, and the update and all backup must be submitted to the department no later than October 1st of each year. Actual use method, owners must update once a calendar year. The update and all backup documentation must be submitted no later than August 1st of each year. If you miss August 1st, go ahead and submit by October 1st, but know that I'm going to highlight that paragraph about August 1st in the letter so that next year you don't miss that August 1st deadline. So for combining methods, in general, owners may combine any methodology described in section 10.614 for each utility allowance service type paid directly by the resident and not by or through the owner of the building. For example, if residents are responsible for electricity and gas, an owner may use the appropriate PHA allowance to determine the gas portion of the allowance and then use the HUD model to determine the electric portion of the allowance. Rural housing and HUD regulated buildings, including those that are HUD regulated by MFDL funds, are not allowed to combine methodologies. So if you have the home program or National Housing Trust Fund in a building, you cannot use multiple utility allowance methods for any of your units. You would have to use one method for all utilities. So if the building, so how to address utility allowance when there are multiple HUD programs in a building. If the building is covered by multifamily notice H 2015-4 or receives assistance from rural housing, the applicable UA for every rent restricted unit is the UA issued by that program. If the building has department MFDL funds, and then the applicable UA for every rent restricted unit is the UA approved by the department or provided by the department. Per the TAC, this is true even if the building also has project-based vouchers or public housing. If the building has multiple HUD programs that are not covered by 2015-4, and the building does not have department MFDL funds, it is up to the owner to say which UA they're using. Tenants with housing choice vouchers in a HUD regulated building will not use the PHA UA that goes with their voucher. They will use the UA approved by the HUD program. Any questions? Nope, no questions. All right, so for applications, if the application includes rural housing assisted buildings or tenants, the UA is prescribed by the rural housing program and no other method is allowed. If the application includes HUD regulated buildings for HUD programs other than an MFDL program, the applicable UA for all rent restricted units in the building is that HUD utility allowance. No other method is allowed. If the application includes MFDL funds from the department, applications may calculate the UA in accordance with the TAC for methods prescribed under little c3, big B, big C, big D, or big E, which is written local estimate, energy consumption model, HUD model, and actual use method. If the application includes federal funds from a unit of local government, but no MFDL funds from the department, applicants are required to request in writing the UA from the awarding jurisdiction for those funds. And for all other applications, you can calculate using the UA as prescribed in 10.614, and you can use any methodology. Upon request, the compliance division or the UA team will calculate or review an allowance within 21 days, but no earlier than 90 days from when the application is due. So if you submit that today, you can expect a response within 21 days from today. And that's all done through email for applications. So you would email it to this email address, the UA-application at tdhca.state.tx.us. Requests not submitted to this email address will not be recognized, so don't email me directly. You've got to copy that UA application inbox. You need to include the questionnaire for applications, not the one for existing developments, along with all required backup based on the methodology selected. If owners want to change to a UA other than what was used for underwriting, the owner must submit documentation for department approval at minimum 90 days prior to the commencement of leasing activities. The owner is not required to review the utility allowance or implement new allowances until the building has achieved 90% occupancy for a period of 90 consecutive days, or the end of the first year of the credit period if applicable, whichever's earlier. But if you are an application that was awarded last year and this year you submit a packet by October 1st or after October 1st, you are triggering that annual review requirement because you're saying you want to change from what was done at the time of application. That's how we interpret that. So be sure then that 90 for 90 rule no longer applies to you, and you're going to have to submit annually based on your methodology requirements. So again, all requests must be uploaded to the utility allowance contact in TDHCA contacts. The department will not approve requests that are incomplete or submitted incorrectly. Keep in mind that the 811 program also has to submit to Bill Craner, and you would need to reach out to him versus us for how that needs to be submitted. I know I spoke with him not too long ago, and he mentioned that y'all are sending those in by email. I don't know if that's still the case or not, so you would reach out to him to find out how he wants that submitted to you. For owners participating in the department's Section 811 project rental assistance program, the owner may choose the methodology they wish to use. The rules for the chosen method must be followed. On an annual basis, the development will submit a utility allowance update to the 811 division. The 811 division will issue an approved rent schedule once the submission is reviewed. The allowance listed on that rent schedule is only going to apply to those 811 units. It does not make the entire building HUD regulated. It is specific to those 811 units. So some keys to success is always upload the utility allowance submission to the attention of utility allowance on the TDHCA contact list. You want to review the submission prior to upload, make sure everything's accurate and complete, and does the posting have the right dates and amount and unit sizes. You want to upload all required items for the methodology chosen. You want to make sure you're using the most current forms available on the department website. And you can email a member of the UA team prior to submission if you have a question. And keep in mind that utility allowance rules are building rules. They are not unit rules. Here is, again, the utility allowance team. We're happy to help. Again, we would rather have you do it correctly by asking a question than have an issue of noncompliance that could have been easily avoided. And that's all that I have. Oh, I forgot to update the date at the end. So utility allowance annual review is required by October 1st, 2022. So if you have not already submitted for your property, go ahead and get that submitted now or sometime between now and October 1st. If you have MFDL funds and you don't want to submit or just don't get it done, we're going to issue those after October 1st. Are there any questions or anything you guys want to add? You guys were quiet.
Is this going to be posted on YouTube?
This will be posted. There will be a listserv email that goes out that says kind of the update and has the link to it. So, and this will replace the training that's on our presentations website if you reference that for new staff or in case you forget something. So are there any other questions? Anything I missed? All right, if nothing else, then we will close it down and end the training. We appreciate you all being here today. If you think of questions later on, definitely don't hesitate to reach back out to any of the three of us. We hope you all have a great day and a good rest of your week. Thanks. Bye.